landscaping, when you've invested in efficient indoor appliances and fixtures, then getting that next increment
Is hard.
is harder.
Absolutely.
But they're doing it, and
That's
more can and should still be done, because we know that it can be done, and Long Beach really demonstrates that. You know, another reason we know more can be done is because we've seen some fantastic turf removal figures coming out now. In the Santa Clara Valley, back in April, the Santa Clara Valley Water District, which serves a big portion of the South Bay and Silicon Valley, increased their rebate from $1 a square foot to $2 a square foot for turf removal. And since then, 365,000 square feet have been removed, with another 866,000 in the pipeline, just for the Santa Clara Valley alone. So that's impressive. And now I'm going to take you to the...
And that represents relatively permanent reductions.
Right, and that's the great thing about turf removal. If it's converted into a lower water use landscape, then that's a permanent reduction. So
This is great.
I
like this.
well, you have Bill McDonnell at the Metropolitan Water District to thank, because I pilfered this from him. And what you can see is, in Southern California, the turf removal is really moving along. This is the residential sector, and you can see it's just shooting up. So we know that there's more potential for conservation because of you know, what's happening as people are continuing to focus on this and making those decisions to change out their landscaping. And the residential sector is impressive. And then here you can see the commercial sector, which really deserves kudos as well. I mean, the businesses in Southern California are really stepping up in their efforts to be responsive to the drought as well.
It's great.
So as Rafael mentioned, you know, in the regulation, we created an alternative path for compliance for utilities, water suppliers with allocation-based rate structures. And so you can see we've approved 2 of those. The third was determined to not actually have one of those rate structures. We also got a letter from Eastern Municipal Water District and determined that they had complied via the other mechanism in the regulation, although they did provide us some very useful information about their allocation-based rate structure. So since the board passed this regulation, which was almost 2 months ago now, back in July, we've received literally hundreds and hundreds of phone calls, letters, emails, and on all manner of topics related to water and water conservation and water use, large and small, mostly focused on the regulations themselves. And I think one of the big takeaways is people want there to be equitable implementation of these regulations, of all, you know, water policy. You know, when they are doing their best and they see their neighbor down the street watering the sidewalk, you know, they want something to be done about that. And they want to make sure that businesses and institutions are held accountable too. That, you know, they don't want to see the city's public works department watering the street either. And that's really been a large part of the response, which is great. People are paying attention and wanting to get results.
It feeds into that PPIC poll that happened right after, I think it was right after our regulations, that said that 74% of the public wanted enforceable regulations.
Right.
And it's that fairness thing.
Right. Yeah. And you know, one of the other things we've learned, I think, from this volume of correspondence and communication is some of the ways that water is used around the state. I certainly didn't know of spray parks that are in use in many of the Central Valley communities during the summer. There's water used for motorcycle racing courses out in the desert, and a myriad of other things that people are now paying attention to those uses and trying to come to terms with. Are they still appropriate given the severity of this drought? And citizens and the media have found new and creative ways to get the message out. So it's very encouraging. I should also mention we've gotten several calls from people concerned about city codes, which require, maintenance of public or front-facing spaces. And we've talked to a number of these cities, and, they've been educating their code enforcement staff to ensure that people aren't being penalized for not watering, but only for not maintaining, which is, slight nuance there.
Well, so you can't have a weed-filled high, knee-high weed-filled lot, but it can be brownish.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Right. Because, the legislation that was signed earlier this year pertains to homeowners associations, but there is no commensurate legislation for local jurisdictions.
Okay. That's great.
So as we look forward, we're encouraged by these numbers, but there's more to be done, especially since the forecasts are still not looking good for precipitation this winter, and we need to conserve our reserves. So we're going to continue to sort of monitor this. We're going to look at the conservation numbers, the forecasts, our reservoir levels, and assess whether we want to propose to you that additional measures should be taken.
Good.
And to make sure that all of the water suppliers are implementing, what's required in the regulation. And I'll also just mention that now this presentation and all the data, the raw data that we received should be available on the board's website. So
Great. I anticipate you'll get all kinds of questions about what it means.
I assume that you'll be briefing or communicating in some way with the California Public Utilities Commission, because they have about 13% of the retail water agencies. And as I indicated earlier, I received a letter from our retail agency, which is an IOU, and while they referred me to a website that has all of their many agencies all over the state to find whether or not my watering was restricted to 2 times a week or 3 times a week or whatever it was. It was quite a confusing and difficult thing to do, and not something that the average homeowner anywhere is going to pursue. So I want to make sure that I will follow up with my water agency, but I want to make sure that the CPUC understands, some of the complexity of guidance that they have been giving, and quite happily that they've been giving, but we need to go a little bit further.
we will certainly follow up with them, and just as a note, they did pass a resolution at their August 14th board meeting, which incorporated this board's emergency regulations for all of their investor-owned utilities.
Good. It's sort of note to self, if we do need to do additional measures, to have one that says, put on front of website, easy.
Exactly.
I've actually been sort of checking websites of different agencies to see how easy it is to find whether they've complied with us or not, whether they blame us for it, whether they own it. It's interesting.
Well, and kind of along those lines, how about, as you mentioned, people want to make sure that they're treated fairly. So when they've taken measures and they see that someone's watering their sidewalk, what can be done to make reporting a little easier? Because there is a lot of confusion. Of course, we structure this in such a way that there's not one size fits all. It's very flexible. It's up to the locals to determine how to best implement and enforce. But is there anything that we can do? I know on the air quality side, there's an 800 number you can call when you're driving down the freeway and someone's spewing out black smoke, and you want to be responsible as a citizen, but you don't have to want to worry about it other than just making that phone call. What can we do to make it easy for people to report?
So there are a few things. We're working on getting a portal finalized for the website where people can go and really quickly look up who a water supplier for a given area is. So if, for example, they're seeing it on their drive to work and they don't know, who's supplying that area, they can go look it up and then call the relevant water supplier and say, hey, I noticed that at such and such an address, sprinklers are watering the street, and can you do something about it? So that's one thing we're doing. For the state, for state facilities, on the state's drought website, there's a place where you can go and submit to the Department of General Services tips on where there's water waste at state facilities.
Right.
So that's available to folks as well. And as we get these calls in, we're helping to refer people to the relevant local officials, whether it's their water district or their city public works department. And I think as those people get familiar, they will be more responsive. One of the things the board did is in the resolution that accompanied the regulation back in July, we urged all of the water suppliers to, make a 311 number or some type of website communications tool available for people to do this. So it's not a formal part of the regulation. It's not a requirement, but we've been trying to work with folks to make sure that it's as easy as possible.
Good. Questions? So let me see if I get this right as I'm trying to just summarize it for folks who may be listening on the web. You got a good response to the survey. This is different than before. You got a good response to the survey. You got a good response to the implementation of regs, and that's just within 2 weeks. So that 70% number we assume is going to be a lot higher the next time. You got good July movement, increased conservation. We've gone from more water, drier year, more water used, to a little bit of progress in June and a steady progress in July, even as people were introducing these ordinances and practices. So optimistic that August is going to show us better numbers. Can't promise it, but optimistic that will be better. So we're going in the right direction, but we still want more, of course, because all of the El Nino predictions that I think were overblown at the time, but people were relying on, that we know now that we're likely to have at least a dry fall and early winter. So all bets are off, and we really are going to need to do as much as possible, but it's encouraging movement, and we'll look forward to people doing a lot more as these things start being implemented. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair summation. Definitely more is possible.
And more would be better.
And more would be better.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know you all have been working around the clock for quite some time, and you're not done. So it's going to continue to be busy, and I don't underestimate how much time you all have spent fielding those calls from people, and you've done a great service to folks by compiling all of this and putting it together in an intelligible way. We're now going to hear from a couple of folks, including folks I'm going to want to say thank you to. First, Dave Bolin. I know you're happy I'm saying thank you to you this time.
I thought also thanks to staff Mark Emerson for designing the portal to get the information.
Look, I'm about to make you a part of every team we have. No, I hope you don't mind. I can see all kinds of places where your technical skill will fit in, but I did just see this when I got here, so I appreciate you updating what was a fine document before, and hopefully you are posting this?
Yes.
Right, and publicizing it?
Yes.
Good.
Well, thanks for inviting me to the podium, Chair Marcus, Chair people, folks, Chair members, board members. I'm David Bolin with the Association of California Water Agencies. The document that Chair Marcus was hoisting up high is available on our website. The way you get to it is through a map. And pretty much, again, the website would be acwa.com. And when you get right to that front page, you'll see a reference to drought response, and then you can click on that. There'll be a map of the state of California, and there are a lot of dots that are colored. And when you click on a given dot, what comes up is a box which essentially tells the story of that agency. And we've been updating that information even as we speak, up to moments ago. Probably it's even being updated right now as agencies are responding to us and reporting out what they're doing. Now, there have been a few, technical challenges here. There's some communication issues. There are a number of things that I want to touch on that have been actually brought up in the staff report. We've been working carefully with staff to try to make sure that the survey, the response, the reporting basically has been robust. We're comforted by the fact that it has been a lot more robust than it has been, and that we're getting good quality data, it looks like, and a pretty good response rate. Again, we could stand to improve. There's a list, I guess, of agencies that have not responded yet. We've been working informally, but somewhat aggressively with our member agencies, which are the public water agencies in the state that are larger agencies, in many cases that are members of Aqua. We've been calling them to make sure that the contact information is to that agency is available to the water board, so we're working off the same page there, and that we have made a contact, we've gotten it on their radar. We want to make sure that they know that they have tools that are available to do the reporting, that the reporting is essential. And we have ongoing contacts with the agencies that have provided data to us to try to get it refreshed, and that's been a bit of a challenge as well. In some cases, agencies have done actions and haven't told anybody yet. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's going on is that there are some actions that are in the queue in terms of scheduling. These are public agencies. They have monthly meetings generally, and in some cases, we know those monthly meetings are scheduled in the coming weeks, and they have not yet gotten the actions done to implement some of this stuff. But in many cases, they've been implementing for a while now, the last weeks and months, and communicating pretty strongly. A lot of them have great red banners across the top of their website. There's a lot of great innovations out there in terms of getting folks' attention. Of course, the contacts through the bill inserts are important, and of course the website addresses and so forth to steer folks to making complaints. One of the big challenges, as we all know, is do the customers know who their water purveyor is? And often, I've gotten some calls myself that have gotten transferred to me, and it's like, my neighbor, down the street is wasting water. Are you guys going to come down and do something about it? And I tell them to talk to the water board about it. But in fact, I don't do that. But I try to query as to what part of the state are you in? What's your agency? And as we know, we have a very complex mosaic for delivering service. It includes the investor-owned utilities. And I guess we have great, we're anxiously awaiting the idea of trying to do a better job with this portal that allows querying by address, that you can actually type in an address and it can maybe lead you to at least a short list of agencies that might be your agency. And the agencies then then folks can be a little bit more focused about making the call to the right jurisdiction. Just because you're in Sacramento doesn't mean it's the city of Sacramento that's your purveyor. So
This is great. This is making our citizens more water literate.
Yeah.
Where does my water come from?
And you know what's so funny is people pay their bill every month, but sometimes they're not quite sure what agency they're paying it to.
Who they wrote the check to.
So yeah, look on your checkbook. Yeah. That's a clue there. So yeah, there's a lot of outreach going on, a lot of hand-holding, a lot more that needs to be done, obviously. One of the rubs that we've discovered, it was hinted at earlier, is this question of mandatory versus prohibitions. And a lot of our agencies have for a long time prohibited the practices that are included in the mandatory prohibitions in the emergency order. And in many cases, and in part of the Q&A that we had, which the water board staff had for the water agencies, there were some good questions about this. Is what if this stuff's already prohibited? And we're already there, right? And so what's happened is in some cases these agencies have characterized their stage as a voluntary stage still, because officially in their water planning process they have not gotten to mandatory rationing, which is right further down the stage line, in terms of staging their responses. But they are already prohibiting all the activities that the water board has directed in the regulation. And so there's a little, we may need to clarify, I guess, about these terms a little bit, and the fact that we're encouraging, at least on our side, we have kind of a choice. You get to choose your red color, which means you have mandatory, and you color your dot red, or you color your dot yellow if it's voluntary still. And yet, a lot of these folks that are still colored voluntary, in their own minds, are, implementing their mandatory prohibition. So we need to get some good clues out there, communications about how they communicate to the water board and to us about what their activities really are, and again to their customers. And again, simplifying for their customers, what are you supposed to do about it? And I think that's going to be an ongoing process to try to help the water agencies, equipping the water agencies to convey a solid message that, we need these kinds of actions, and we need them now. We are seeing some good trends. We're encouraged by that. We think, again, as soon as some of these meetings that are coming up are in place, and we've got another month worth of reporting under our belt. Actually, we've got a few days from now as the next window, and then another month after that, that we'll start seeing some trends. And I think that will be instructive for us all. In general, I want to encourage folks, who may be listening in on the meeting and that are representing their own water agencies, to look at their sites, to look at the message they're conveying, and then the citizens and folks that are concerned about conservation in California to go to the Aqua site and see the information we've got there. We do have a lot of links to some other assistance that they can use, and then the water board's done a great job too on their site. And so, and there are a lot of other agencies and groups that are in the business of helping Californians conserve water. And so, one of the examples is the whole turf replacement situation and seeing the trend line there, but recognizing the fact that we've got a feedback loop here where just because somebody got some money to tear out their turf doesn't mean they're saving water this month or even next month. They have to replumb their system. They have to, execute. And we're going to see some, I guess you call it, some additional results in coming months for actions that people are taking right now or have taken real recently that we're already reporting. So, so there are a number of considerations here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or make any further comments as board members would like to direct them.
Great, thank you. You've highlighted the fact that we're now in the much more complex but interesting, I think, arena of looking at what different things communities are doing, what their different baselines are, what more they can do.
Yes.
They're all in very different situations in terms of their perception of need, and the goal has been to have us all in this together and to take the longer term look and assumption that it's not going to rain next year or maybe the next as the prudent steps to take now, versus looking at a disaster of incalculable proportions in a couple of years if we don't act now.
Sure. One of the elements that comes to mind is the sectors, the focus on the residential sector, which is a proper thing. We've got a lot of residents and consumers that can make some changes immediately in the way they use water. But we have the whole commercial, industrial, institutional sort of sector, lots of turf, lots of industrial processes, some of which could have economic impacts if we start cutting back on the way we use water in some processes. And so that's a whole area that needs to be discussed. We're obviously going to be focusing near term on this gallons per capita per day idea, and even that is as has been hinted here, is a complex
Very
question. It's really often about how much improvement are we seeing in a given agency as opposed to standards across the state or even across the different regions. As you've suggested, again, hinted at in terms of sort of the geographic outline, we've got different geographies. We've got different climates, different kinds of housing patterns in different parts of the state. And so we've got a lot of complexity here to have to sort through in terms of how we ratchet down on the conservation message statewide.
Right. Yeah, it's just all percentages are not alike.
Yes.
So it's just how do you get enough data points in there to tell a story that's a useful story and a realistic story.
And I have a question, both for both of you, actually, for all of you, I guess. Would it have been, as we move forward in terms of putting a box for people to write something in or to check, would it be better if we simply asked them what are your restricted days for outdoor watering? And they could say 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever it is they say, rather than referring them to their drought contingency plan in their urban water management plan, many of which may not even remember where they put their urban water management plan.
No.
I'm sorry.
That can't be, he said.
I'm sure. So, maybe we should get simpler about that particular element of information. And Dave, I'd be interested in.
We think, at least our database, and this is a little awkward in that we've got kind of some parallel innovation going on here. Our little boxes, if you can look at the sheet there that I passed out, which has the kind of the stories of these different agencies, many of them are allowed to pretty much tell their story to us as to what their restrictions are.
Yeah.
And many of them have done that very thing, said here are the kinds of outdoor irrigation restrictions we have going. And I guess one of the things that we have appreciated about this emergency regulation and its rollout has been the willingness to be flexible and allow those local agencies to use their existing kind of commitments institutionally, the contingency planning process, and commitments they've already made to communicating with their public. And, a good example, the even, odd versus a certain day. Those are just different cultures and different jurisdictions. And conceptually, the state could have just said, okay, we're going to use every address in the state of California, and it's either even or odd. And that would have been
A mistake.
probably a mistake. I'm glad you said that word and not me, but, and we're glad that we didn't do that. However, there are still some jurisdictions that are using the even-odd approach. There are other jurisdictions that said Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and there are some that have said 2 days a week, and they decide what they are. And then there are others that are, it's like, you pick 2 days, we're good as long as you don't gutter flood.
Time of day,
Time of day is
the
another-
amount of time.
Yeah, there's windows, and obviously there's best practices out there. Almost everybody gets the idea that you should be doing your irrigation before dawn and before the wind comes up, and in morning hours of your days, and maybe in the early evening, but not maybe too late. And so that's the kind of thing that we've built in as flexibility in the state, and we think that's a good thing. We think that's a strength, even though it's going to be very difficult to compare and to, I guess, noodle on the results we're getting back and fine-tune them at sort of the consumer level. And we think that that's where we need to think about statewide goals and about, maybe significant results that we can get from certain types of practices, as opposed to maybe mandating particular procedural approaches from the top down.
If I can also add to that, there's been a real benefit, I think, for many of these communities as we've implemented this regulation, and that is for them to take a close look at what they actually have put into their plans and figure out whether or not it's workable, it achieves the kind of conservation that we want to pursue or not. And we have had many conversations with various water suppliers where they are actually going to be making changes to their plans because they found in this drought emergency, this is not necessarily all of the steps they want to undertake or the exact steps. And so they're making changes, they're adjusting. So it's been very positive from that perspective as well.
That's
A
great.
very important theme, is that they're working this out, they're working their plans, and in some cases, they're finding that their plan isn't as maybe well conceived as they had hoped.
Well, one of the things I'm happy about is doing the regulations has unleashed people to do stuff, finally. Whatever it was that was holding them back, the dam seems to have broken, not a good water metaphor, whatever it is, whatever inhibitions they had about moving forward, whether it was worry about their consumers being mad at them if it rained or whatever it is, people seem to be in motion finally, and that's good.
Yes.
Yeah, people were waiting to be told.
I guess so.
Yeah, yeah. So.
Make it so.
Yeah, so interesting because Ms. Turkovich, as you're saying, a lot of these plans are being amended, and I have to, I've been kind of quiet here just listening to folks and thinking that it's not just a matter of being told what to do, but also the reporting is helping people figure out what to do, and trying to make sense over the best, way to the best data to report, whether it's a percentage or per capita, and of course these regional differences that you're talking about. And just wondering if there's been, any study, or would it be worth it? I know we need to move forward quickly here, but to be thinking about the best way to tell the story in order to motivate people. What is a percentage of reduction? What does that mean to the average homeowner? And how to determine a percentage versus gallons per day versus, I know Barry Nelson and others have presented some information about, I don't remember exactly
Water
how they
smart.
termed it, but a way,
Behavioral.
comparing yourself. So if I were to compare myself to someone in San Francisco, you're looking at gallons per day, I may come up with all kinds of reasons why, well, that doesn't really work for me because, I don't live in a densely populated area, so I'm not going to pay that much attention to it. But if I get compared to somebody down the street
Right.
that has a house that it's about the same size, about the same
Exactly.
age, generally speaking, people in my neighborhood probably have yards about the same size, then that's probably going to motivate me much more.
Yes.
So if I see that I'm not performing the way my neighbor is. So just interested in your comments on that.
Well, to that point, actually, there's been some work done. We've done a lot of work collaboratively with a number of folks and put this on our Save Our Water site, which is a more consumer-oriented communication site that is a State of California Department of Water Resources in partnership with Aqua. We've delivered sort of this
SaveOurWater.com.
SaveOurWater.com. Good advertising. Thanks for that. For those of you who would like to Google it right now, there's some materials on there about what does the 20% look like in practices. What does so how much do I have to shave off my shower? What is the normal shower?
Right,
Well,
if
it
people wanna
turns
know.
out it's a minute and a half or 2 minutes off of a 5-minute shower, and you get a huge savings of water there. And the number of flushes in the course of a day, and a number of washing machine loads that it takes to kind of get it the right, what we're talking about trying to do. And it turns out these practices, when you start thinking about it from the point of view of a homeowner managing their household, setting your irrigation system back by a couple less minutes per zone, you can achieve these numbers. And so they've actually translated the percentages, which are pretty abstract for most people, into
Blocks.
and even gallons. Who knows how many gallons people use? They don't think in terms of gallons. They think in terms of the time they're using the products, or the number of times they use the products, or the processes that they use. And so so that's the kind of information that's there. There's lots of good information like that. There are a number of vendors out there that are working with water agencies to provide more consumer information about their practices compared to somebody else's. You'd mentioned one of the vendors there. I won't necessarily advertise that vendor, but there are a number of others that and those that are working and actually they have a business model, which is that we provide actionable information to the consumer so that they understand where they fit in relationship to their neighbor in that community. And in terms of irrigation practices, here's what it would take to deliver these kinds of savings. So a lot of that information has been out there. It's good information. This is a great opportunity, this time, to trade and exchange the best practices in the water community. And I think a lot of that's going on now. And, we're seeing a lot of agencies that are asking questions of the next door neighbor agency and saying, what kind of bang for the buck did you get with this, and renewed interest in different practices that maybe they had thought were not attainable to them.
The only thing I would add, this is an area where I would sort of characterize it as it's a work in progress.
Definitely.
There's
We have a ways to go.
There's a ways to go. More and more of the water suppliers are looking for ways to provide customers with this information that they can use. A lot of places, you only get a water bill once every 2 months. So, to even keep it sort of on the mental radar is a challenge.
It's a good, thank you. That's assuring that because that related to my question that Board Member Diadamo had about, getting to that point that where I think maybe in energy use, we may be a little further ahead, still learning there too. But, knowing for my region, what's a reasonable budget for indoor use? What's a reasonable budget for outdoor use, given my circumstances? And it's encouraging to hear that Aqua is facilitating these discussions about setting these reasonable expectations. And, you know, I hear similar input from folks like that do the allocation-based rates. They really try to do that homework to come up with, okay, you know, or your lower tier is really what people can do health and safety based on, or and plus, you know, reasonable landscaping, et cetera. So this, I think, is a productive discussion. You know, it helps us set rates, and we can grade ourselves as individuals. But then to another point, this is it. I appreciated how you folks have been pointing out, you know, the commercial, industrial to some extent, the institutional part of the story. And what was interesting to me, where I saw, for instance, the turf removal line, how there was took a little time for the momentum to build up to get the results into those sectors. And I would imagine, and I'm sure you're looking at this, but the response is there's going to be a lag factor potentially, just because it seems like there are layers there, you know, whereas the residents, the single family residents response is going to be more quick and immediate, whereas you have folks that are hired to do things, you know, and so there's a need for outreach. Oh, you know, problem? What problem? I was just doing what my contract tells me to do. So, you know, I appreciate highlighting that. And do you expect then maybe this momentum to sort of build in terms of production numbers, you know, coming down sort of in a lag fashion with commercial and institutional? And maybe is there hope that we can have long-term demand reductions in those sectors that might be more fruitful in the long run?
Yeah, I just want to underscore that idea, the long-term versus the short-term. And again, traditionally, you get into a drought, you ask for conservation. The implication or the social contract idea is we're just going to tighten our belts temporarily until we get through this thing, and then it's back to business as usual. I think what we're seeing in this particular experience has been, first of all, we've been committed to a lot of these longer-term institutional changes for a while. This idea of rethinking landscaping in California, it's a significant sea change that we're going through, and there are whole sectors that are engaged in that. The green industry, in terms of practices, like you say, contracts that need to get renewed with new provisions. Irrigation, landscaping controllers, you know, all kinds of things like that. That I think we're in the midst of both of these things happening. There's an immediate response question: what heroic things can I do, you know, for the drought, you know, at a sort of a homeowner level, or at a maybe even you know, as a citizen, and then what can we do institutionally, longer term, that, you know, we're not going to have the bounce back like that we had before. However, that being said, and this is the glass half full or half empty side of it maybe, is that once we've squeezed that conservation out of the system, that water use has changed fundamentally, then the next drought, you know, we're not going to have quite the flexibility we had before. And we've talked about that as an industry. It's hard to measure that, what that is. Obviously, you know, things change, perceptions change. You know, green is, or brown is the new green. You know, that kind of stuff sinks in over time. But, you know, and again, we're even figuring out messaging on that. For instance, whether or not that's the right message. You know, we've gotten pushback from a lot of the green industry on that, saying, you know, you don't have to settle for brown versus green. It's maybe olive. You know, that you can have a Mediterranean climate here.
That's right.
You know,
That's
it's something
right.
appropriate. So,
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff is happening, you know, at kind of a policy level, and then at a personal level, and it's all variable around the state. It's kind of hard to get, you know, boil it all down to just numbers and percentage reductions.
Right.
But
Definitely.
I think we're on the right track.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the time.
We have one other speaker, and we are going to have a visual. A visual that is always good this time of the day. Ken Weinberg, the Director of Water Resources for the San Diego County Water Authority. Thank you, Ken, for coming down.
Thank
Or
you. Thank you, Chair Felicia. I want to be Chair
Yeah,
Felicia
let's get that
today,
correct.
for today at least,
Yeah.
and board members. I just wanted to reinforce some of Dave's comments, and I won't repeat them. I'm just going to say I'm going to reinforce Dave's comment. He did a great job of covering the big issues, but I thought it might be helpful for the board to get the perspective from a local agency, at least, you know.
When in drought. That's good.
Yeah, that we're kind of dealing with the drought, or our member agencies are on the front lines dealing with the drought, but we try and do this as a coordinated fashion as possible. Also want to commend staff for being careful with the data. Water Authority, we collect monthly water use data for 24 agencies, and it's very difficult. I can't imagine doing this for 400 agencies because there's always going to be these aberrations that you know don't make sense and you need to follow it up. But we really appreciate that because there is a lot of media interest, and I think we're prepared every month when the report comes to you to be able to respond to that. I wanted to answer one of the questions before I show you this. I just wanted to talk about a couple items. One of the questions about water agencies redoing their plans, and I think we saw this in the last drought. And it's either fortunately or unfortunately, this is my third drought. So it doesn't mean I'm good at it, it just means I've seen it. But in the last drought, we had a lot of our agencies thinking that I don't want to tell my customers what to do. I just want to tell them, save this amount of water and let them decide what to do. And I think what we found out in the last drought, and why our model ordinance said, you know, limit the days of watering, fix the leaks, do all these kind of things, was that that was difficult, that people responded better. And I think that's, you know, one of the reasons why the regulations are helpful, that they respond better when they know exactly what to do. And we saw immediate and significant savings last time. And I think as we, you know, especially in Southern California, I think the chair mentioned, you know, we've been doing conservation since the first drought in my career back in 1991. You know, as demand hardens, it becomes harder for the consumer to figure out, well, what can I do to save water? So it really, and to some extent, we're going to find out where everybody is, because there may be a lot of people already watering 2 or 3 days a week. We know that they are fixing leaks. We don't see the runoff in the gutters like we used to. You know, the time of day watering, nobody's watering in the middle of the day that I know of in San Diego County when I go around. So I think we're really going to see, you know, where we are in conservation and how much more difficult it is, and that's going to vary state by state. And that's why I wanted to mention that, you know, there's a lot of variables that go into reductions, and I think the information you've
Of course,
been shown.
that's a problem we want to have, right? That we get to the point where it's hard to get further reductions. I mean, just want to make that clear.
Well, unless we rethink our landscaping.
I mean, the other side of it, I think Dave mentioned it, is we manage droughts and we structure these ordinances to avoid economic dislocation, you know, and to protect jobs and protect the economy. So, you know, as it gets harder and harder to conserve, we may have to make those choices that do have an economic impact. And I think that's why we're more focused on supply development. But there are variables that affect the numbers that you're going to see. Besides demand hardening in parts of California, you've got areas that just don't have all the water they need. So their water use is going to go down. I think what we've seen in Southern California is we've seen record-breaking heat on top of, you know, demand hardening, which makes it harder. But I think I'm very encouraged by the data that staff shown for the South Coast, and also what I've seen for San Diego County, is that we're reversing that trend. And one of the things in drought response, and the data you've seen is really before the regs took effect. It's been a very busy August at the retail agency level, going to their boards, going to their city councils, getting all these mechanisms in place. But, you know, I think we're going to see that trend continue into the future, but it was really kind of like slow the train down, because we've seen increased water use from, you know, the above normal temperatures. We've seen increased economic activity that always results in increased.
That's a good.
And these are good things, and you may see that, you know, as we go on. There's, you know, you're going to see. Well, I'll give you an example. A craft brewery in San Diego County went through a water audit recently, and they've doubled their amount of water use from last year. And it's a good reason, because they're making twice as much beer. And that's more jobs. And those are the things that I think Dave was talking about. Well, we don't want to cut that back, but there is a place for commercial, industrial, and institutional, for government, to make sure they're using less water. One of the comments I do want to reinforce is on the reporting of GPCD next month is residential. And that's important because we are going to get a lot of savings in residential. But I think you don't want to give the impression that this is just about residential savings, and that maybe you should consider the flexibility to report overall GPCD,
Sure.
which would include commercial, industrial, and institutional and government, so that, we're all in the public sector doing our fair share. So we're
Are you going to outdo Lawn Dude? Is that what you're telling me here with this video?
You know what, Long Beach, they have really been.
No, Lawn Dude.
Oh,
Is this going to be cooler than Lawn Dude?
The lawn dude.
Lawn Dude.
I don't know, this
No,
looks like
it's
when
not.
in,
This is going to be pretty serious.
this looks like when in drought, go to the beach.
Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
It's the end of the day. So that was the point I wanted to make, is that you're going to see, and I expect to see, the trend continue, and this increased participation in the conservation programs, and San Diego County's probably the major participant in the turf replacement in the Metropolitans
Great.
program. You're going to see savings from that participation, but what you're also seeing, and this is consistent in previous droughts, is that engagement in the conservation programs means that you've got public awareness that they need to do something, and that awareness really translates into behavior. So one thing I could do is replace my turf, I could do some other program, but I could also, turn my sprinklers off, because that's the real challenge in a drought, is you're looking for savings right now. It's great that we've got structural savings, and every time we have a drought, we fast forward long-term conservation, but people also have to change their behavior now, because next month you want to see a drop in water use, and that's kind of our emphasis, and that leads to the major tool in getting that behavior change when we're in the midst of a drought is public outreach and education. And whether we do it through bill stuffers, or you've got SWRCB.com, you've got Metropolitans program, you've got the Water Authority. We're coordinating a regional advertising in San Diego County. So our tagline was whenindrought.org, and that's where we started earlier this year when we were involuntary, but we're switching that. We have switched that emphasis. And if we could just show the 30-second commercial. So this is a 30-second commercial. You can just show the one. The one that says 30 seconds, it's the third one.
Can we,
San Diego has done a great job saving water, but drought conditions are worsening and the need to save water is more serious. Mandatory water use restrictions are now in effect. Here's how you can save water. Limit outdoor watering days and times. Water only during the late evening or early morning hours. Eliminate runoff. Sweep instead of hosing surfaces. Repair leaks within 72 hours. Learn more about local restrictions and water-saving resources at whenindrought.org.
So I think I brought that one because we really highlighted some of the restrictions in the emergency regulations and trying to get that out. And we've done, what Dave talked about on the Aqua website, we've done on our website, so everybody can kind of get to their water agency. To get the word out, and remember, I am the Director of Water Resources, not the Public Affairs Director. So one of the things we're going to do is, just to kind of get this to go viral in a landscape kind of way, is, similar to election signs, we're going to just get thousands of these out to people that are doing something to be water efficient. And so that, that message is constantly in your face, so to speak, and top of mind for people. So, I think that's really kind of the tool of choice right now, is really to get the message out, get it out strongly, work with the customers. I think what I'm hearing from at least one of our agencies, question was about wasting water, reporting water wasting. They've seen like a 3.5-fold increase in reports of wasting water just since the regulations came out in July. So we're starting to see it. It does take time for things to take hold. And so I think as we get through the next couple of months, you'll see more and more of a response, and we'll have to tone our messaging and if there's any other actions we have to take if we're not seeing the savings. But I would say it's going to be very difficult to see similar savings across the state, just because I think Board Member Moore's point is we're at different starting points. And I think I'd ask you to keep that in mind. And that gets to the GPCD issue, is that it is really a complex thing. And I think, as Vice Chair Spivey Weber said, you don't want to compare very different areas of the state. It's not a competition. It's really measuring your own performance. And I think that's the difficulty, but it is a great indicator of how you're doing as a region or how you're doing as a city or those types of things. But a lot of factors go into that. One issue that I've heard about GPCD comes from areas that have very low GPCDs, like 100, maybe less gallons per capita a day. And oftentimes these areas are disadvantaged communities. And they may not, the question we get is, how am I going to show savings? I'm already down at 100 GPCD.
Right.
And then the issue is, what I've started to hear, and it's not a water issue, it's more of a societal issue, is, well, if they use less water, you're going to start, that's blight on the community. And so I'm just pointing that out as, as you evaluate this data, it's just to, look at it carefully. You may hear comments. I know we are hearing that kind of comment, so that, it's just something to be aware of, that, zero GPCD may not be a good thing.
Right.
So,
They have that on the moon.
yeah,
On the moon.
yes, they do.
And it's
So-
made of Wensleydale.
So thank you.
Great,
Appreciate
thank
the
you very
opportunity.
much, Ken.
This is
Appreciate
really
you
great.
coming.
One thing.
Some magnets for.
One thing that I know you're not public affairs director and all that, so I won't hold you to this. But those are great tools. But we may be facing a challenge if there is sort of a couple days of rain in October. Do we have kind of a game plan for keeping the drought message going, given that we're in such a deficit statewide for our water supply?
We went through that in the past, and what we did is we sent out press releases and notify the media that everybody needs to turn their sprinklers off for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and that, keeping that in their top of their mind.
Great, thanks very much. With that, thank you for all the work. Thank you particularly for your innovative work. And then we are going to, tell me if I get this right, Andy, we are going to adjourn into closed session for a personnel matter, but we need to take a 10 to 15-minute break. So 10 after 4, we'll meet in the room in the corner. 2:30. Okay. Thank you all.